Good afternoon, everyone. To begin our 2026 One South Carolina Forum, please join me in welcoming Furman University's Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs, Beth Ponteri.
Good afternoon, everybody. All right. I'll give it a B. That's with great inflation. Okay. I am just so thrilled and honored to be with all of you today for Riley Institute's 4th annual Building One South Carolina Forum, and to honor and learn from our 2026 recipient of the Riley Institute's One South Carolina Partners in Progress Award. Please know, at Furman, we continue to prioritize engaging with our local and state communities. As we affirmed in our most recent strategic plan, Furman has a responsibility to use our intellectual capital and resources to have an impact on our collective community. Indeed, deeply embedded in Furman's core values is an aspiration, and I would actually say commitment, to advance thriving communities that honor inquiry, promote diversity, strive for equity, appreciate beauty, and act as responsible stewards of our planet. These values capture what brings us here today, right? Cross-sector leaders from across the state together in this room, celebrating progress. Today's forum offers a space for us to understand that passion, resilience, and community partnerships that brought into existence the Center for Heirs Property, the 2026 recipient of the Riley Institute's One South Carolina Partners in Progress Award. Rooted in the low country of South Carolina, the Center for Heirs Property, known as CHIP, envisions a nation in which everyone can enjoy the legacy of home. Today, we'll learn about the center's contributions to economic and social progress, its reliance on a broad and diverse coalition of partners to produce change, and its ability to bring its model to scale. As we know, that's one of the most formidable challenges. So offering guidance to all of us in our communities who seek to replicate the center's landmark work in regions across the southeastern United States. But before we get to the learning, I have a few thank yous to say. So first, thank you to CHIP's staff, board, participants, and partners who have collectively built and continue to build pathways for families to preserve their land and their culture in such a way that brings economic opportunity for themselves and, importantly, for the communities in which they live. If you have been or are currently engaged with CHIP, whether you're an heir, involved as a staff member, donor, board member, community partner, can you please stand for us? Round of applause. We're so grateful. Can't wait to hear about your work. I also want to acknowledge the Riley Institute's long commitment to celebrating principled leadership among legislators and civic leaders. Since 2005, over 20 years, the Riley Institute has held its annual Riley Wilkins One South Carolina Legislative and Civic Leadership Awards. Alongside these 2 awards that recognize individuals for their lives of leadership, the Partners in Progress Award was added in 2022 to identify and recognize broad initiatives for their significant and lasting impact in building South Carolina into a state where everyone can not only live, but thrive. In 2022, the Spartanburg Northside Development Group received the inaugural Partners in Progress Award, followed by the International African American Museum in 2023, and then turned 90 in 2024. We skipped 2025. No, you did not miss the event. We skipped 2025, in case you were wondering, in order to make plans to fold this award fully into our other One South Carolina Awards programming, which brings us to today. After this afternoon's forum, the Center for Heirs Property will receive the 2026 Partners in Progress Award at tonight's Riley Wilkins One South Carolina dinner, alongside with our legislative and civic award winners. In addition to the work we'll honor this afternoon and evening, I know that many of you with us today, including several of our speakers, and actually myself as well, have had the wonderful opportunity to engage with a diverse group of leaders throughout the state through Riley Institute's Diversity Leadership Initiative. Yes, snaps, I'm going to have you stand up in a minute too, so just hold on. This award-winning program equips leaders across our state with the tools and perspectives needed to improve outcomes in their organizations and in their communities. Their strong commitment to making our state a great place to live is clear. So if you are a DLI graduate, current class member, or a member of the Riley Institute DLI team, will you please stand? Whoa, that's awesome. That's fantastic. Thank you. I also want to recognize our forum sponsors, Sisters of Charity, Michelle Mapp, and SCE TV, alongside the many sponsors of our OneSC family of awards, who are listed on the back of your program. Thank you all so very much for your generous support and leadership towards building One South Carolina, where all people have the chance to live, grow, and thrive. This afternoon, we'll hear from heirs, leaders, and community partners to understand the critical issues the Center for Heirs Property seeks to address, the gaps it seeks to fill, the collaborative work across industries that has turned ideas into programs and brought them to scale. And of course, most importantly, the lessons we can learn today to take back to our own communities. So, to begin our forum conversations today, we'll watch a short video about Chip's work created by our friends at SCE TV, and then our first panel conversation will start after the video. So let's watch together. Thank you so very much for being here.
Land gives you the first element of ownership, control, and freedom. With land, and especially land the title is cleared, you have the ability and the freedom to use that land to plan a financial future.
Heirs property is land that has been passed down for multiple generations, often resulting in multiple heirs owning the land, which makes it more difficult, really, for it to be an asset. It's such a significant issue because, one, it is the major wealth building tool in America. And if you cannot maximize the use of that land and pass it on, then you are, to some extent, preventing them from leaving the legacy that they would like to leave.
My great-grandfather, George Singleton, was enslaved, and once he became a free person, he acquired all this land through his slave owner. From what I have researched so far, this property means everything to me. It is a legacy of what my grandfather left his children, and it's so much lineage and memories here. It means everything to me.
For 20 years, the Center for Heirs Property has been helping under-resourced families and small acreage landowners protect what matters most, which is the roof over their head and the land under their feet for generations to come. We do that with several tools. Legal support is one of those, land management, and broadly, we're also empowering communities. So under that legal support, what we're doing is we are conducting educational seminars. Our lawyers literally go out, and for maybe about an hour or so, they're providing legal education around the issue of heirs property. We're also drafting wills, because that is one of the primary ways to either reduce heirs property or to prevent it. The other challenge I see is that these families own an asset that could be used to help them move out of poverty if they had the right tools. And so we started the Sustainable Forestry Program, which consisted of education. So we helped them access those conservation programs to actual professionals in the forestry arena.
The Center of Heirs Property helped me navigate a lot of things. They gave me a clear understanding of what heirs property was. They really helped me a lot, and they kind of just gave me a plethora of information on what heirs property is really all about.
Building trust is so essential to our work. Unfortunately, trust has been broken in many of the communities we work in. Therefore, we have a community engagement team that conducts outreach. They meet with community leaders, faith networks, and agencies to build relationships while also learning more about the community's needs and experiences.
Over the last 2 decades, CHIP has been able to resolve 445 titles valued at more than $33 million. For land size, it's about 1,600 acres. So in essence, what we've done is we've unlocked the potential in the land for the families so that they can now multiply the equity in that land and also improve their communities. After 15 years of doing this work, we saw where there was such a great need. We were getting calls from landowners in other states saying, "Can you help us?" And unfortunately, we had to say no, because either there was not another organization doing this work, and our attorneys are not licensed outside of South Carolina. So what that did is it helped us think about how could we amplify our work without doing it. So we were able to partner with the World Wildlife Fund, Kimberly-Clark, and the Mississippi Center for Justice to actually pilot an Heirs Property initiative. And that was in 2021, so it was very successful. And from that point, we have ventured out into 4 other states and helping them use our model to serve the landowners in their state. They're able to take whatever component they would like that works with their community.
Land is more than monetary value. It represents family, it represents history, it represents legacy. Land is, at its core, a place we call home. That's why protecting it matters.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Julie Meredith with the Riley Institute, and it is my pleasure to be able to moderate our panel conversations today, during which we're going to be learning more about the landmark work of the Center for Heirs Property. This first conversation that we're going to have today, we'll have 2. We'll talk about the foundations of the Center for Heirs Property, how it got started, the work that it does at its core, and many other things related to the foundations of its mission. And I'm so pleased to be joined by some of our amazing panelists, and you'll meet more later. We have Faith Rivers James, who is the Executive Director of the Coastal Conservation League and the former leader of the South Carolina Bar Foundation. Roberta Brown Swan, who is a liaison with the VA hospital, whose family has participated in services with CHIP. And also Dr. Jenny Stevens, who is the CEO and founder of the Center for Heirs Property. So we're going to start off right with you, Roberta, in talking about the amazing SCE TV video that we just watched about the Center for Heirs Property. Gave us a snapshot about the trending problems that led to the founding of this work. But I'm hoping that you can bring these issues into clearer view for us by walking us through a little bit about your own family's experience that led you to seek services with CHIP.
Well, my mom had passed maybe about 1.5 years ago, and I, with my family, other 6 siblings, we had to decide on how we were going to navigate the property having to go through probate. And of course, because I was the one taking care of my mom, I got that job. And a colleague of mine recommended that I get with CHIP, and I did. And that was one of the best moves I could have made, because from the time I made the appointment to when I got with Ms. Jackson, one of the attorneys there, that assist and aided me along the way, and her staff, they were kind, nice, and comforting. And during that time, that was very important. I was comfortable. They led me step by step through the entire process. They kept me informed, up to date on deadlines, what was needed, what I had to do. So at that time, that was what I needed, but I was also somewhere where I felt like family. I felt comfortable. And that's important, to go somewhere where you don't feel like you're misunderstood.
Absolutely.
So I want to kudos to them, because I have nothing but good things to say.
Wonderful.
Right.
Thank you.
But that's how I got there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And certainly your story represents one of many, many stories of heirs property owners who are needing these type of
Oh, yes.
services. Faith, I want to ask you a question related to that. The center came into existence due to advocacy from heirs property owners alongside community partners and leaders such as yourself who recognize the depth and complexity of these issues and why they mattered so much. You were with the South Carolina Bar Foundation at the time that the center launched and were integral to its founding. So hoping you can share a little bit more with us about some of those foundational partnerships that made this happen.
Well, thank you. I had the opportunity to serve as the executive director of the Bar Foundation, and at that time there was a lot of attention focused on the conundrum of heirs property and African American land loss. And so the foundation was actually working in partnership with the community foundation, the Coastal Community Foundation down in Charleston. And the community foundation had worked on this from a study perspective. They had talked with heirs families, and they were trying to get at the genesis of the problem. On the Bar Foundation, through our advocacy and support for charitable efforts, we actually made a grant to South Carolina Legal Services. And the reason was we wanted to look at not only talking about the problem, but actually solving the problem for individual families. And so as a lawyer, I always preach that lawyers are leaders because we are problem solvers. And we look at big things and try to figure out how to undo them bite by bite, issue by issue. And so through that partnership, bringing the community foundation's relationships on the ground and our connection with lawyers and people who are able to write laws, we were able to put together a program, and we were able to get funding from the Ford Foundation to really spur the work that became the Center for Heirs Property. It was critical to get that first seed done. We could show them through the Bar Foundation support, the legal aid could get these cases done, that the misperceptions in the community about heirs property, which were prevalent at the time, and Jane and her work and the center staff has really changed that perception. Because people thought that heirs property was like a poor man's trust. You don't have clear title, so it can't be sold. What we didn't realize was that it made it more vulnerable than anything else. And so the bar actually produced a video early on, and IThe broadcasted it, and the center did workshop after workshop after workshop to really get after that misunderstanding, to help people understand, as we did here, that this is something that we need to solve. And so her property never became heirs property because she probated it just after her mother died. And the center was able to resolve that for her.
Amazing. So Jenny, the Center for Heirs Property has developed these incredibly innovative programs that create systemic solutions to big problems. And the work you do is complex because the problems you're trying to solve are incredibly complex, as Faith alluded to earlier. Most certainly, I'd love for you to just spend a few minutes talking to us about the early work of the Center for Heirs Property.
So, good evening, everyone. 2 clarifying points. I am not an attorney, so I'm not providing you with legal advice. And the second one is whenever people say, you're the founder of the organization, I like to say, no, I am the steward of the organization, because it was truly the community's idea. The team and I just had the luxury and the opportunity to work with that and expand upon it as we saw the need. Also, when as Faith said, yes, it was because Coastal Community Foundation had received a grant from the Ford Foundation, and they would go out into the community or holding focus groups around the issue of rural community economic development. And when the staff would pose the question, they would hear people say, I own land, but. And inevitably, what followed the but was heirs property. And they saw where families did not understand what that meant. They just knew it was family land, but they didn't understand that if you own your land in the form of heirs property, that you can't get a mortgage, or you have limited access to state and federal funds to do housing rehabilitation, or God forbid that there should be a natural disaster, right? So those are the things that the foundation discovered, and we partnered with the Bar Foundation, South Carolina Legal Services, and we ran a project for about 2 years because we wanted to really test the idea. And I must say kudos, because one of the board members of Coastal Community Foundation's in the audience, Miss Anita over there, Zucker. And it was a nice, healthy conversation by the board about what should be the next steps. And eventually what happened is that the nonprofit itself was created because there were several groups providing education and providing outreach, but there were very few, all next to none, who was providing the direct legal services, which is the key unless you're gonna have major policy change. So that is how it came about. Basically, the foundation responded to a need of the community. And the team and I, we are now taking that, the community's vision and walking it out.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I did call you the founder earlier,
You
but I
did,
love
but
Stewart all the more.
I'm sorry. I just, I have to point that out
No.
because I don't want to take credit for what the community has
Absolutely.
really done.
And it clearly is such a community effort, and certainly as well as led by heirs themselves who have advocated for this. And so thinking further from your standpoint, Roberta, as you've experienced the impact of this work through your own lived experience, I know you've also learned a lot about how this work has impacted not only your family's trajectory, but also changed outcomes for so many other families and whole communities as well. Anything you might want to share about what you've learned about the impact of the center since your own personal involvement with it?
Right. Well, as far as for the trajectory, ultimately my family and I, we were able to move forward, and I purchased a home, and yes, that's where I'm living today. And so that worked out. And but more importantly, I would love for other families to be afforded the opportunity that I had to be able to have such an organization, help them navigate that system, and just to be able to have such a positive outcome like I had.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And if I might add, usually the first introduction to CHIP's work is through a community legal education seminar. We believe that education is really the first thing we do as an organization, and just making sure that you understand certain things like, because I live on the land, then it belongs to me, or because I pay the property taxes, is mine. Well, yes, but that what it really means is you're one of the more responsible family members, but there are others who are not around the table that you must consider. And so don't want to, not acknowledge how important the education and outreach piece is, but ultimately it is about the delivery of legal services.
Amazing. Yeah. So Faith, it's one thing for us to try to understand the impact this work has on families who have participated in CHIP services, but I'm hoping you can also broaden the lens for us to understand the larger economic development impacts of this work. How does the mission of Center for Heirs Property influence preservation and growth throughout the Lowcountry?
Well, it's important to understand that from an economic development standpoint, we resolved this one issue for Ms. Roberta. But no matter where you are, Heirs Property, the family members own an interest in that piece of property. They share it. But with land, and land is unique, I used to be a property professor, but they will tell you that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So owning a piece of property with a clear title is worth more than a piece of property that has 8 individual owners. And so as we were able to help families come to resolution of disagreements or misunderstandings about the land, when you unify that title and that family walks away with a clear title for each person, or they share it together but in a more secure form, with one entity in charge, that is now an asset that will grow and build. It's an asset that they can use as an underpinning for the rest of their financial portfolio. Think about it. How many of us could do what we do if we couldn't get a mortgage for a home, as Jenny said, or if you need to send your kids to college? It's there as a resource that you can pull from to help catapult your family's financial future. And so that part is important. But the other part of it was, and Carl Anthony was our program officer from the Ford Foundation, and he came down to a meeting at the old Bluesteins on King Street where the community foundation was, and he looked across the table at me and he said, you know, what you all have here is an equitable growth problem. And I said, I'm thinking, I don't know what you mean by this, right? But it's the Ford Foundation. Yes, it's an equitable growth problem. But what it really meant down at the core of it was that outside of your urban center, there was an exurban ring of properties held as heirs property. What that turned into was an invitation for less desirable growth, for bad uses, because those families weren't really empowered to go speak up for themselves in the land use process. And so a part of this effort is also to help people understand that you have the right to resources for infrastructure, that you have the ability, you should have the opportunity to go say to your local representatives what you would like to see in your land and what you don't want to see. And so when they're able to protect and stand up for what they want to see grow around their neighborhoods, just like we do around our neighborhoods, then that creates a better place where everybody wants to live, where the culture can be preserved, and where you have an opportunity for economic growth that both creates growth and preserves community.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that. Jenny, some of us may not understand just how much civil legal services matters in the larger landscape of social and economic progress in our state. And I know you're not a lawyer, however, certainly can you give us some more context about how the center's work points to that important issue?
So a couple of years back, we actually kind of tested what would be the actual cost on the market if families were resolving a very simple case with heirs property. And at that time, it was $10,000, right? So if you're a criminal, you're assigned an attorney, right? But when it's a civil case, one, you've got to figure out who are you going to trust, right? Where are they located? And how in the world am I going to pay for it? And which is one of the things that CHIP does, is that we are taking care of the most expensive part of this work, which is that of the professionals, the attorneys and the paralegals. So I can't speak to what the actual percentage is when it comes to civil legal services, but just want to point out that, yeah, there's not a fund anywhere that covers this work. We are able to, I like to say, we pull from multiple sources, be it foundations, be it government, be it individuals, corporations, because literally it does take a village to do this work. And we know that the landowners that we work with cannot afford it. But I don't want it to sound like they're victims or they're vulnerable, because they do contribute to the process. It's just that we are taking on the heavy lift, which is the financial lift. But I don't know about anybody else. I know this isn't a side note, but how many of y'all get along with your family members, which is really the greatest challenge in dealing with this, right? So, you know, that's where we're there, trying to be family whisperers and help them come to some resolution.
Absolutely. So I think I want to hear Faith and maybe Dr. Jenny, you too, more thoughts on, are there any local or statewide policies that you all think could move the needle in expanding access to representation in civil matters? You know, you hear so much of everyone has a right to an attorney in a criminal case. Of course, that is not the same for so many civil legal matters, and at the heart of that, property law, which really is a matter of whether do we get to keep our land, our home, our family's generational land for for the future, how important that is. Are there any promising practices taking shape elsewhere, different parts of the country, or maybe here in South Carolina that you all feel could be potentially adopted here, things that maybe we could be advocating for?
Well, I guess I would start with, of course, the American Bar Association tells us that probably 25% of the civil legal needs of lower income families are met. So that's 1 out of 4. But here in South Carolina, we have the grace of entities like the Bar Foundation, which continues to support CHIP to this day, from inception to this day. But there are other mechanisms that we can employ to be sure that an attorney is available to help families deal with the roof over their head and the land under their feet. So it's something that could and should be funded. But the beauty of it is that we have the model. When we say we're going to look to other places for a model, South Carolina is a standard, the standard bearer for the nation in how to attack heirs property issues. I have traveled, I used to live in North Carolina, and I'm so proud to say that South Carolina was so far ahead of where North Carolina is. The South Carolina Bar actually adopted a resolution in support of heirs property 20-some-odd years ago, and they can't even get the Uniform Act passed in North Carolina.
All right.
So
Showing
proud of
shade.
South Carolina here.
Yeah.
But I think the key point is, as we move forward, what are other things that can happen next? And the first is the center worked very hard to help get the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act adopted in South Carolina. I had the opportunity to serve as an observer in that process, and I've written about this. We used some of South Carolina's principles in creating that law, including the provision promoted by Senator Pinckney, which gave families the right of first refusal in those partition sales, and the concept of OLT that our South Carolina Supreme Court affirmed in one of their cases. So South Carolina is at the forefront. But I think the next part is, what do we do next? The Uniform Act, Senator Scott, who passed away a couple years ago, he had a commission looking at what do we do next about heirs property. And I will say from my vantage point, the Uniform Partition Act provides judges with the tools they need to help get to the bottom of these issues. It's a tool to empower judges to solve the problems. And I'm a child of the 70s, as the song says, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But beyond the Uniform Act, there are some things, some policies with regard to taxes and how we treat heirs property or property that has common owners. And that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges that face heirs property owners today, and that is taxes. The challenge, as you know, who volunteers to pay the taxes? Well, that's the person who's responsible, who takes responsibility. But the law does not help us reconcile rights and responsibilities to a piece of property. And so they'll send one notice. It may go to one person. It doesn't go to everyone. One person pays the taxes, and if it ever goes to sale, if that person goes to pay taxes at the redemption sale, the law says, thank you, you've been a great member of the family. You have met your fiduciary duty to redeem the property for everyone. And in some places, they won't even accept payment for a family to redeem their piece of property because they say they can't prove that that person's an owner. In other contexts, we have times when government has to take property by eminent domain. Sometimes that goes across tracts of heirs property. By the time the government works on that condemnation, they could then help the family finish the deed, right? Finish the task of getting to a clear title. But what they'll do is put the funds in an account, and then those families have to hire a lawyer not to partition the property, but to partition the proceeds. And we can do better than that.
Amazing.
If I might add, the other thing about not being able to redeem your property at a local tax sale is one of the other initiatives we're working on with the Coastal Conservation League as well as Habitat South Carolina is about using a tool they call the heir affidavit, so that you and remember, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not trying to explain it to y'all like that, right? But the fact that it is a tool that you can use to redeem your land at a tax sale. The other thing at the national level is that I had the pleasure of serving on the USDA Equity Commission for 3 years, and one of the recommendations we made to USDA was basically, rather than offering loans to heirs property owners, and I already told you that you can't use the land as collateral, right? So why don't you fund basically CHIP's model across the US? That has not been enacted, but we would love to make sure that does happen so that there would be resources for families all across the nation.
Incredible to think about. Roberta, engaged citizens like yourself have helped the Center for Heirs Property to grow and to thrive. What's your mission? What is your call to action for all the leaders who are in the room today?
Well, just like mentioned in the video, I would love to see CHIP and the different leaders reach out to a lot of the rural areas, which they do, like mentioned earlier, because it's a lot of generational land out there where, you know, there are disputes, but not only that, just knowing how to navigate the system. And knowledge is power, and knowing your options and your entitlements is important. So, you know, moving forward, I think that would be my thought on that. And also, you know, to end, pretty much to have an organization that you feel trustworthy, that you can trust during the process, because it made all the difference to me. And for that, I would be forever grateful. And anyone that I could sing that to or tell, I will do it, just like now on the stage. So again, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Incredible, and thank you. Absolutely. It's clear that trust is a core value that CHIP has fostered in your organization as a whole, with the communities that you're serving and with the individual families as well. Well, Jenny and Faith and Roberta, we really appreciate you all laying the groundwork of understanding the complexity and the depth of the work that the Center for Heirs Property is doing. And thank you all so much for the incredible ways that you all are supporting this mission. Let's give them a hand. So, as our first panelists return to their seats and our second panelist come up and join us, we're going to shift from thinking about the foundational work of CHIP to learning a bit more about the center's growth. As we alluded to in the first panel, CHIP's model is being replicated and adapted to other communities across the United States. And CHIP continues to expand and deepen its impact in the Lowcountry, empowering property owners not only to preserve their land, but also to help the land work for them and their surrounding community members. So, of course, Dr. Jenny will continue in this second conversation with us, and we're also honored to be joined by Betsy Taylor, who is the Executive Director of Lichen Knowledge in Kentucky. We have Olivia Jones, Executive Director of the South Carolina Bar Foundation, and Jim Myrick, who is a retired attorney and CHIP's 2026 board chair. So, Dr. Jenny, I'm going to start with you again. Your leadership at the center seems to have always had this focus on how your critical mission can be brought to scale. There are so many organizations out there that are certainly, and rightfully so, laser focused on serving a certain community with a specific set of services, but the Center for Heirs Property has always been much more expansive in nature. Tell us more.
So when CHIP originally started, we were only serving 5 of the 46 counties in South Carolina. And when we would go to conferences and talk about all our glorious work we were doing, they're like, you're only working in 5 counties, right? But what they failed to recognize is we were actually building a model. And so we expanded beyond those 5 counties. And the way that we do it is we're very community focused. because we remind everybody we live in these communities in which we work in. So when we do go into a new community, yes, we have a community engagement team, but it's about building a relationship with the leaders who are in the community, who will then introduce you to the rest of the community. Because you're right, though I always say the one asset CHIP has that if we ever lose it, we're going out of business, and that's trust, the trust of the community, because of the history of land loss. Now, okay, said that about within the state. So we are a statewide organization, but in CHIP's trajectory really took off in 2013. And that is when we were awarded a grant from the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, where they recognized that African Americans had little to no representation in the forest industry, either as owners or as people who are benefiting from it. And CHIP was, the one thing we had going for us is we knew law and we know the community. We didn't have foresters on our team, but the good thing is we had foresters on our board. And so part of that, once again, you can kind of see the theme with CHIP. We never do anything alone, which is interesting since I'm an only child, right? We never do anything alone. We're always partnering with other entities because we recognize our limitations. So after the forestry program started, because with the U.S. Endowment, they were partnering with two divisions of USDA, and that is the Natural Resource Conservation Service as well as the Forest Service. And CHIP, we always do a great job. I'm just going to be honest. We always do a great job. And because we were doing a great job, the people at the national level of USDA started to notice us. And they came to visit us, right? And then they said, it was the Assistant Secretary to, I'm trying to get his title right, to Civil Rights. The one thing he said to us that stuck with me, he's like, I'm often called when things go wrong. But this is the first time I was called when this is really what USDA should be doing. So that was very impactful, and he became our cheerleader. So now fast forward, we're doing that. And then 2018, there were special concessions made in the Farm Bill for Heirs Property. We started to see lots of organizations who are not providing direct legal services begin to talk about their expertise, which they didn't really have. But they started to talk about their expertise. So one of the things is that the team and we worked very hard to create this model, and we wanted to make sure not that just the people from South Carolina was benefiting from it, but we wanted the entire nation. And we had a dream. One of our strategic plans says, we're going to be the hub for all things Heirs Property, and we want to be the national model. Well, that happened. We were introduced to the World Wildlife Fund and Kimberly Clark owned several, I'm going to say plants for the lack of a better word, in the Mobile Basin, which contains part of Mississippi and Alabama. And they had done a study. And the one thing that was obvious was that there was a high percentage of low-income people living in that basin, high percentage of African Americans, and a significant amount of heirs property. So their thing was, here's kind of like low-hanging fruit. And so it's fortuitous that our desire to be the national model and their need for us to help them build their model happened to coincide. So Mississippi and Alabama were our first, well, actually it was the Mississippi Center for Justice was our first trial. And it worked well, and Betsy, who's sitting over here, she'll talk about how we became involved with Lichen out of Kentucky.
Amazing, yes. And next question is for you, Betsy. I wanted you to talk about your work in Appalachian, Kentucky. I understand have been able to adapt this model. So tell us how you've been able to do that, to utilize CHIP's model, and also knowing that no two communities are apples to apples, how have you been able to make it work for a very different type of community in Appalachia? So, yes.
So it's so interesting to think of you being a single child, because if I were to summarize what CHIP is to Liken, that's the Livelihoods Knowledge Exchange Network, it would be to say CHIP is like the ideal older sister, the kind of sister that that inspires you, helps you, but also lets you become yourself. And it's been transformative for us. It's only a couple years that we've been partnering. So Liken works primarily in communities that have been buffeted by boom and bust economies in Central Appalachia, and then also in indigenous communities in Louisiana and elsewhere. And in those situations, you get, these communities are hit again and again by an explosion of jobs, a loss of jobs, big entities coming in when there are natural resources that are suddenly valuable, and the land is being bought up rapidly by folks with very well-paid lawyers. So in Central Appalachia, for instance, 75% of the land in the historic coal counties is owned still by outside and corporate owners. So in that situation, you know, low property tax, low taxes, the local government withers in a situation where they're not getting adequate resources. You have communities that are not, I have to use my, yeah, communities with a lot of assets because they have to take care of themselves so much when there are floods or strikes or whatever. They're very self-reliant, many assets there, but are not adequately supported by professionals and the kind of expert civic sort of networks that the Center for, the Riley Center for Civic Engagement is nurturing so wonderfully, where you're bringing together different sectors and different kinds of professions. So it's a cruel paradox in our work. It's hard to get deep into the community and build those community relationships, and then also build the connection with the experts that you need. And CHIP, more than just about any other organization I can think of, has managed to do both, to heal that broken relationship. So for instance, in so many of the communities we work in, there's a deep distrust of lawyers because lawyers were always part of the sort of courthouse gang, you know. If there was a lawyer at their door, they were probably there looking to get your land. So
Notice the same the similarities. It's a different part of the country, but the same similarities.
very different, but when it was a couple years ago when we actually decided to come to meet with the folks at CHIP, and right off the bat, we could feel those similarities. And also, a lot of people talk about community engagement, but you kind of wonder, is this real? But the moment that Jenny said, when we said, how do you do community engagement? And Jenny said, go slow. I thought, this is for real. Because it's putting relationships first, slowing down, turning up at many, many church potlucks. So I have a list of 5 things that I think CHIP does wonderfully in community engagement. Listening, being on the ground, cultivating local leadership. I don't think I've ever been to a CHIP event without clients there, so celebrating those voices. The interdisciplinary approach. And then now, bringing people together. So Liken is now literally taking the CHIP model, So we've relied heavily on constant mentoring from them in setting up direct legal services, but also in things like wills clinics. And it took us like a year to really get them set up, but now we've had a number of wills clinics, and that's galvanizing and is having a very big impact. So we're adapting, and especially, you know, we have many problems connected with heirs property and mineral rights in the area, and that's going to take deep work. But then also the wonderfully collaborative approach that CHIP has taken, setting up regular monthly meetings with a network of folks, and then helping to facilitate partnerships in I think it's 7 regions now. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like it's sort of like you've built the ski jump for us. You had to climb up the mountain, and we can just sort of jump off and take off.
Amazing. Yes, it's incredible to hear that. I'm curious, Jenny, as you all are going into so many different regions and parts of the country to spread this message and to be able to share your model, have there been any things that you've seen? I know many of the regions that you're working with are also rural and agricultural in nature, and yet there is certainly a need for this type of a model in more suburban, urban regions as well. Have you had any areas that have kind of fit that bill as well, and how's that working?
Right. Well, people assume, because we talk about sustainable forestry now, that all CHIP has ever done has been work in rural areas. But actually, that's not true. When we started our work, it was really working with the city of Charleston because their clients needed to access housing rehabilitation funds. So if you look at the size and the acreage of the property that we, to the title that we resolved the first 5 years, you'd be like, I can't believe you spent your time doing that, because it's not as significant, but it was significant for the families. Mm-hmm. Whereas now you will see the 100, 200 acres of tracts of land that we are providing services to. So it doesn't matter if you're urban, you're suburban, you're rural. Our co-workers in Philadelphia calls it tangled title.
Oh, cool.
But it's some of the same issues. And so, yeah, so we don't distinguish between urban, rural, suburban.
That's helpful to know, and I think that's so important for us to remember in the room, that this type of work is so relevant regardless of what type of city, metropolitan area, community we're coming from. So as Betsy was alluding to earlier, the growth of the Center for Heirs Property's mission and influence certainly is a testimony to the power of collaborative partnerships. So I want to touch on that for a minute. Olivia, the South Carolina Bar Foundation has been such a key partner to CHIP since its beginning, obviously, as Faith was talking about earlier. So I'd love for you to just talk for a few minutes about how the South Carolina Bar Foundation brings really our whole community, legal community together in South Carolina to promote justice by funding a variety of legal access and education opportunities for our state. And how is CHIP's mission aligning with your overall vision?
So the South Carolina Bar Foundation, you've touched on our mission to promote justice by funding legal access and education. And we have 3 main buckets of organizations that we want to fund every year. So one of them is civil legal aid. We also fund law-related education that might take place in middle school and high school. It also might be community and public education. And then a third category is administration of justice. So that is removing barriers to accessing our legal system and providing advocacy beyond the civil legal space. And so if you think about what you've already heard up here today, specifically from Jenny, and you look at what the Center for Heirs Property is doing, well, they're preventing the loss of heirs property, they're resolving heirs property issues, they're unlocking economic potential of property, And they're doing that by drafting wills, by educating their communities about heirs property, and they're addressing title. And all of that fits very beautifully within the focus of the South Carolina Bar Foundation, the civil legal aid, law-related education, and administration of justice. So it's a delight when we have an organization like the Center for Heirs Property that is consistently showing up and doing the work that they're doing. As an umbrella funder for a number of legal nonprofits around the state, the Bar Foundation is uniquely positioned to bring everyone together to focus on collaborative work and impactful change. And echoing back to what Jenny said, we never do anything alone. And hearing Betsy and Jenny talk about the relationship building, that's really core to change. And then taking what Faith said earlier about lawyers being the problem solvers, I really like that too. So imagine getting a bunch of lawyers and legal folks in a room who are all public interest minded. And the Bar Foundation has the privilege of being able to bring all of those folks together and hear the passion and the excitement that comes from those meetings.
Thank you so much. Jim, obviously key partnerships have been key to CHIP's growth, and really the need for future partnerships, though, has never been greater. Can you shed some light on some of the current challenges that the center is facing and what is needed in order to assure continuous growth for this important work?
Yes, gladly. Thank you. Well, I think when you're looking at the challenges that we're facing in terms of our partnerships, I thought about it for a while, and I think I want to break it down into three little areas. Number one is government grants. A lot of what we do has a government component, right? We're involved with the USDA and the forestry group there and the endowment. Those are very, it's not just the current administration, and I know everyone in this room is sensitized to that, but let me make sure you understand, it's not just that. It's a constant scrutiny anytime you hold hands with the government. It's got to be right. It's got to be right, and you have to be specific about it. And so because we're always under scrutiny on it, we've done three things masterfully, most of which commenced way before I got involved. But number one, the center commands data. I don't know if you saw that, but we know who we're servicing. We know how many acres we're servicing. We know the depth and how we deliver it. All of those things talk about reach, but they also talk about your effectiveness. And that's critically important. The second component there under that is extremely conservative practices financially. When the current administration came in, everybody was like, what's going to happen? What will happen? Well, thank goodness there was such foresight from Dr. Jenny and this wonderful staff who's over here at this table to think about this ahead of time. And all the financial practices have been so conservative that there is a logical, reasonable buffer that's been built in to make sure we've protected ourselves in times of storms. The third thing I want to point to in terms of our partnerships and the challenges, we've got to remember, and you've heard it more than once here, trust. We never get too big for our britches. We know who we're serving, and we know the priority. They come first. Roberta is the most important person here because that's who we serve. That's what we have to get right. And let me tell you, when you hear her story, and those stories like her start unfolding around you, and you hear about how lives have been changed intergenerationally, and people who worked for generations for their land, they get to keep it. That story of success is a hugely important partnership for us, and we never discount it. The second thing that we really need to do is what one of my old friends used to call a happy problem. And this challenge has to do with, this is not a South Carolina problem. This is an America problem. This inequality and the inability to pass on intergenerational wealth, it has to be addressed. It's a happy problem in that we have other states who are coming to us with South Carolina, as Faye said, the standard bearer. We got this right. We got it right early on. And now other states are coming to us and saying, how do we do this? How do we do this? The wonderful Lichen Project from Kentucky is a great example, just helping them along their way. But I don't think anybody's told you the states yet. I was listening carefully. I'm going to list them for you quickly. Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Kentucky, West Virginia, Texas, and of course, South Carolina. That's where we're working now in order to make these things come true. So that's our happy problem, is dealing with that growth, because when you partner with somebody from a different state, you have to understand that's going to be unique to that state, right? So the third thing I'd mention on this is it's important for us in terms of challenges and partnerships to seek broader visions, because some partnerships might be apparent to you, like the Donnelly Foundation, that you know they're community oriented, but others might be a little less obvious, and you have to think creatively about how you can work with people. John Deere, well, wait a minute, what does John Deere have to do with that? There are a lot of African American farmers. So John Deere has been a wonderful partner for us and did an important video called Breaking Ground that's had national exposure and created national exposure for us. So John Deere has been an important partner. Kimberly Clark, that was alluded to earlier, so I won't repeat that one. But like the World Wildlife Fund, if you put all this land together, you're talking about a considerable reach across land, and there's a lot of wildlife that's affected in that way. So our challenge, I think, with those partnerships is to make them creative and to sort of think outside the box. And I do want to say thank you, South Carolina, for the Bar Foundation, because they saw this as an access to justice issue, which it is, and we've been recognized across the country because y'all had that vision. So grateful for that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And it's exciting to hear just how incredible it is when you think creatively about what partnerships can look like, how much broader that reach can be. Absolutely. You want to say something?
Yeah, before we come to the close, I would ask my colleagues who are sitting at table 6 to please stand. Now, literally, I think this might be a little more than 10% of us. We started out with 3 people, and I'm going to get this wrong. We have 55, 56, one of the two now. And most of that growth occurred from 2013 till now. Thank you.
Incredible.
And I want to go back to one thing that I neglected to mention. As some of our partnerships are under challenge, as they are for anybody who deals with the government. Part of the expansion is to think how we can partner with individuals. And I don't want to leave that behind because it's very important. I know it's a difference in my life. I'm thinking about it differently. As a South Carolinian, I take great pride in this group because this is a South Carolina thing, and I'm at least its origin was. And I'm so happy that we're a standard bearer for it. I think individuals might recognize something here that is worthy.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Olivia, I want to come back to you for a minute, just thinking about the power of partnerships. And I know Faith and Jenny were able to talk a little bit about how transformative civil legal access truly is and has been, and that they have been able to forge through Chip's work. Zooming out just a little bit on that topic, what unmet civil legal needs do you see across South Carolina, and what kinds of partnerships, just kind of thinking from your perspective from the South Carolina Bar Foundation, do you think are really needed to close those gaps?
So in 2023, we got the South Carolina Statewide Civil Legal Needs Assessment. And I'm holding the executive summary. You can find that on the Access to Justice website. There's a full report that's around 300 pages.
Oh, wow.
So
Easy
this
reading.
gives us really incredible qualitative and quantitative data about the civil legal landscape in our state. So it's pretty amazing information. And it gives us 12 key takeaways about what we're looking at, what we're facing. It's not necessarily offering solutions. We're working on that part. But it's telling us what the current situation is. And we have to be informed and educated about what the situation is in order for us to resolve any problems. So the number one finding isn't a surprise. There are too many people in need of civil legal services and not enough services to go around. And we've known it for a long time, especially those of you who are boots on the ground working with the clients. But now we have data that supports what we know. So I think looking forward, it's taking something like this and sharing it with your friends and your colleagues and saying, we've known about this, but now we have the data. Another finding is that housing is one of the areas of greatest need. We've known it for a long time, but now we have information that supports that. And it has a bunch of other really interesting findings. I'll give you one more. Lives in crisis present big challenges for legal service providers because most likely it's not just an heirs property issue. There's probably other things that have a ripple effect for a low-income person. And so that's the data that we have that I hope that will lead to some really incredible change. And although we don't have specifically any economic impact data for South Carolina, if we look at it from a national perspective, the Legal Services Corporation tells us that for every dollar invested, civil legal aid returns on average $7. So it makes a huge difference. I hope at some point we'll have data that's specific to South Carolina that will help us better answer that question. I can tell you that the South Carolina Bar Foundation, since its inception in 1971, has awarded more than $60 million in grants across the state of South Carolina to nonprofit organizations. And this funding cycle alone, we are awarding more than 50 different grants totaling over $5.2 million, which is the largest allocation in our organization's more than 50-year history. So we are doing everything that we can to get the money out and into the hands of the people that are really making a difference and doing the work. And this circles back to what I was talking about a few minutes ago, but it's getting the folks in the room who are doing the work, who are working with the clients, who see the need. That's where the change is going to happen, and that's where we're going to see the biggest impact.
Thank you so much. Betsy, thinking from your perspective and as being one of these communities who has been able to take CHIP's model and run with it, we know that's got to take such a deep commitment on your part and others' part of building partnerships, building collaborations, really in the image of how CHIP has done it and how difficult that is, but a huge commitment that is. What would you say to leaders in this room today who recognize the importance of this work, perhaps for their own regions, but maybe not quite sure exactly where to start?
I'm fascinated by learning about the synergism between some of this research and data collection and the vibrancy of on-the-ground practical problems, because actually that's how Lichen was pulled into this work. About 5 years ago, I was contacted by Dr. Cassandra Gaither Johnson, who's a preeminent scholar of heirs property, has done groundbreaking work, and she was starting to crunch the numbers on probable percentages of heirs property. Now, one thing that is a huge obstacle here in terms of data is we don't really know how much heirs property there is, because in each county, like across Central Appalachia, the PVAs are naming it all different kinds of things. It's almost impossible to aggregate in an easy way and get accurate. Oh, sorry. The county officials who actually keep the land records.
Thank you for
translating
for us.
I had an acronym moment. But Dr. Cassandra had been processing some large data sets, and she realized, using her very innovative methods, that the highest concentration of heirs property that she was seeing across the country was in Leslie County, Kentucky. And so she contacted me, and we started to begin to look at the situation. It turns out that it's a hot spot. Central Appalachia is a hot spot across the country, and nobody in the policy world, the activist world, was thinking about heirs property. There was one article. People have studied land there, and I remember when we first met, and I said this to you, Jenny, and you said, why? Didn't anybody notice this? And of course, people had it in their family, but Dr. Cassandra connected us to folks at Alcorn University, so that we were then connected to a whole network that was primarily based in historically black universities and colleges that were at the forefront of trying to get to the root causes of heirs property and therefore solutions. And so from that research, and then we got some research grants from Alcorn, we were able finally to start going to foundations that fund work in Appalachia. We've still not convinced those foundations that it's a serious barrier. And suddenly, just in a couple years of work on the issue, we're now the experts on heirs property in Appalachia. It's really quick expertise, thanks to leaning on Chip. But it's vital to the transforming economy in Central Appalachia to really quickly get a grip on heirs property. It's not just in the rural outlying areas. All across those states, the industrialization in coal camps, there was a lot of money put into some really beautiful buildings in these tiny coal camps. As we're now working to build up a regenerative forestry program based on the extraordinary non-timber forest products that can be found in the ancient forest in Central Appalachia. We're looking to do heritage tourism using all the skills that local people have and mostly they just, sell things in very informal ways. Some of the famous products are ginseng, but there are many other products, tree syrups. This can be the basis for a new land-based economy. But when we try to work with folks to do systematic land planning, we keep running up to the problem of tangled title. And we need some really skilled interdisciplinary teams. So Central Appalachia is the water tower for tens of millions of people up and down the East Coast, right? If we can really regenerate those very damaged forests with things like agroforestry, there are all kinds of benefits to wider populations. So land use planning, and we've been studying South Carolina's green infrastructure plan because we're trying to actually mimic that too. So we're stealing a lot from South Carolina.
You're just borrowing, you're not.
We are contributing the non-timber forest products too. I think we're foregrounding that. So bottom line is there's a big need for interdisciplinary cross-sector webs of support, and it's wonderful that the Riley Center for Civic Engagement can bring together so many types of knowledges in one room. And once you get a partnership, you never know where it's going to go. That's the part of, because people get together and, as you're saying, new ideas jump up. So, but again, not only in communities, but in interdisciplinary work or cross-sector work, relationships are everything.
Absolutely.
And so the kind of skills that Chip has developed in that are, I'm actually a recovered academic, so I know how hard it is to do interdisciplinary work.
Well, thank you so much. I know I've asked a lot of questions, and I know probably many of you in this room also have some questions that you would love to ask our panelists as well. So for just the last few minutes that we have, I am going to allow a few questions from the audience. We have a couple of our Riley team members, Kelly and Megan, with some handheld mics that they're going to pass around. And if you do have a question, if you'd raise your hand before you ask your question, if you'd state your name, and then also if your question is directed to a particular panelist, please let us know as well. Also, we do have Faith and Roberta here at this front table, and we can bring a mic to you all as well. So if you have a question for one of them, they can also answer too. All right.
I'll get us started. Hi, I'm Kirsten Naomi Chapman with United Way of Greenville County. I have to admit, and I think there's a few more folks in the room, I did not know much about the Center for Heirs Property before. So thank you for inviting me, Julie. I'm so glad I got to learn so much more. I am really interested. United Way, we are experts when it comes to cross-sector collaboration. I'm really interested in what you've learned about sustaining commitment of such a diverse group of stakeholders over time, particularly for an issue that might not enjoy a high degree of visibility on the public agenda.
Who are you directing? Okay. Really, I would say it's the principle of WIFM, what's in it for me. Once you can identify, because for me, any partnership, there has to be benefits. And it's even better if the partners don't do the same things, because then they're not competing. So for us, it has been that. It has been recognizing, once again, that it does take a village and that we cannot do everything. Sometimes the partnership wanes a little bit, right? And then something else will come up, and because we have the relationships, it's like an old friend. Hadn't talked to them in 10 years, right? But you pick up the phone and they're like, hey, that's Jenny. So I think that is also part of it is, make sure you don't burn any bridges, because it's very important. I mean, stay in contact with each other and just recognize that there always has to be some benefit for participating in the partnership. You want to add anything, Betsy?
I think also thinking at a systems level, like root causes, because that's where you see the connection between people's issues. So, there's been a tendency for some people to sort of say, oh, heirs property is a racial issue or something else. No, let's get to the system of what keeps generating it. And then you hear those connections and, resonances between different work.
Other questions? Oh, or anybody else who wants to answer that one? Other questions anyone has? We've got.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Donna Waits with the Sisters of Charity Foundation of South Carolina. So kind of going along the thread of partnerships, is there anyone, or not person, you don't have to name names or organizations, but who's missing at the table that you've tried to get to join the movement? You've got a lot of leaders in this room who represent a lot of sectors. Just curious to know who else are you missing?
Sorry, you trying to put me on the spot in front of everyone. Part of, it depends, and I know it's not a good answer, but local government, of course, they are important. They all don't participate at the same rate, right? One of the hardest USDA agencies, and I hope there's nobody in here who works there, is rural development. People forget that housing is an issue that rural development supports. And if heirs property is an issue, why isn't rural development at the table? The other one, and I'm going to take credit for this not being as great of a relationship, is working with realtors or developers, because of the history among that group and how they've treated our landowners, it is sometimes difficult to be open to establishing a partnership with them, because remember what I said earlier is that trust is the greatest asset that CHIP has, and perception is reality. So that one, I think, as I said, we need to figure out how to do that. And just individuals, well, really everybody, individuals, corporations, because remember, it does take resources. And Brett, I'm putting this in there for you, okay? I gotta ask her that. You know, it does take resources to do this work. And I think if people could see themselves in the work, and I promise I'll be quiet once I say this. The thing that I like about CHIP's work is we can ask you, well, what are you interested in? Then you said, well, I'm interested in family dynamics. We got you. You can say, oh, I'm interested in the environment. No problem, we got you. Or, you know, our conservation. CHIP's work is so eclectic, is that the word? It covers so many areas that it doesn't matter. So what we are working on is making sure that we make everyone aware that it's not a family thing, because we all know once properties are lost, it impacts the community, it impacts the county, it impacts the state. So I hope that I answered your question.
That's incredible. Thank you. Jim, would you want to?
The only thing I'll add to this is something that sort of my mind is expanded to, and yours might too. But a lot of people think that what we do just involves land, raw land, when they think of Heirs Property, right? That's what they think about, undeveloped land in a rural area. But really what we do touches housing in a big way. Jenny alluded to it, but think about it in terms of housing, not just for this generation, because most of those places do have a homestead. That's not just an individual, that's a family. And it's not just that family, it's also people who might otherwise live on that land. And it's also not just that family now existing, but the next generation for housing. So when you start thinking about it in that way, it's really much broader than just land. It has to do with providing homes and housing to communities.
Rightfully home.
Right.
I will just add, not totally responsive to your question, I can't think of a particular person or group, but one of the biggest issues that we see as a funder is ignorance about the depth of the problem. And that's why I'll keep bringing up the data in the civil legal needs assessment. So there seems to be this perception that, well, someone's handling the problem, someone is handling it, and so I personally don't need to worry about it. Someone else, I don't know who that is necessarily, but someone's dealing with it. And we now know, because of the data, in South Carolina, if we look at the federal poverty guidelines, for example, there's only one civil legal aid attorney for every 14,855 eligible people. So even with the incredible and impactful work that CHIP is doing, they can't possibly meet the need. And so I think that's important to keep in mind, that even with all of the funding we could ever hope for, it's still not going to meet the need. And so getting folks to really understand the depth of the problem is going to be a key part of being able to see some change.
I think we have time for one more question. Okay.
It's a quick one. So Jenny, you used my new word for 2026. It's multiplying equity. And Betsy, you often referenced non-timber forest products. My question is, as much as the legal work is important and being rightfully home is important, at the end of the day, for a lot of people, it's about money. So can you talk a little bit about the extractive piece, or the sustainable extractives piece of Heirs Property and forest management?
So this is a big challenge, and we're trying to build out the resources. The issue with non-timber forest products is that there's some very big international markets out there. I mean, what people in Japan will pay for hickory syrup, right? And there are not many people producing it in this country, but many of the people who really are committed to long-term purchasing of non-timber forest products, ginseng, all kinds of herbs, roots, syrups, etc., want to know that it's regeneratively farmed and sustainable and organic. That takes a level of education and monitoring over large territories. So what often happens is what has happened like with coffee production. The people who actually end up benefiting from an explosion in organic coffee sales are the better educated people who come in with equity. And our focus is on trying to nurture folks who are really working class folks, many of whom have invaluable intergenerational knowledge about how to produce these things. And for whom it's part of their deep cultural identity. That's a wonderful branding, right? If you can say this is the real thing, but we're trying to figure out, in a context where 75% of the land is owned by outside corporate entities, how do we build a coalition of folks who can develop land use planning to certify these products with accurate data in order to be able to go for those high-value retail chains. The tree syrups are taking off, and that is thriving across all of Appalachia that are not coal counties, but our mission is to the coal counties. So we are trying to work to educate the Forest Service about the importance of going to the areas where there's real entrenched poverty. And people know this, but they're not educated enough to fill out the, forms and certification. So we're going to do it. It's working with tree syrups and ginseng.
Thank you for that. And thank you for those. Did you have something you wanted to add to that, Jenny? I know that and thank you for these questions that you all have asked. I wish we could have gotten to more of them, but due to the sake of time, I just have one final question that I'm hoping that all of you here can answer in just a couple of sentences each. As you think about the future work of the Center for Heirs Property, what brings you hope, and what is, if anything, is a call to action for these folks in the room today? And I'd love to start possibly with Jim and go down the line. So Jenny has the final word.
The first thing I would say about it is just the simplest thing. When you learn this story about Heirs Property, when you learn this story, the kernel of it, the heart of it, is an injustice, right? These families who have earned this land, that because they didn't have a will that crossed the T's and dotted the I's, it could go away from them forever. The hope I find in that is that's such a compelling human story that if people will pause to understand the problem, that there's human goodness in everyone, and they will recognize this as something of merit. And they can bring it to their homes and to their companies and to their businesses and help address the problem. That's what I would say. That's the origin of my hope.
Awesome.
I'm really inspired by the relationship building that you've talked about, Jenny, and that Faith touched on as well. And that's the key forward. And I like what Betsy was saying about that you told her go slow. And I think that that's really important. I think with every conversation, it's a new opportunity to connect and share about the work that's being done. And it gives me a lot of hope for what's in the future, the potential.
What gives me hope is that CHIP is demonstrating that if you go deep into a few communities and then build relationships across other regions, you can go to scale. It's working. that the whole, I mean, you know, those monthly meetings, the annual gatherings, the amazing work that the CHIP staff and Danielle O'Hara are doing, the wonderfully facilitated meetings that bring people together. This is a model for scaling that works.
I always say I don't like to do a joke because I usually never get it right, but my hope is that we take over the world. The whole point of being able that no family, no matter whether or not they're in South Carolina, Georgia, Ethiopia, wherever, that they have the tools that they need to remain rightfully whole.
Incredible. Well, thank you so much to our panelists and to our audience for joining us for this conversation to learn about the transformative work of Center for Heirs Property, their commitment to preserving land, to strengthening economic mobility shows what's possible when we invest in families and communities. And as we've seen today, it is collaboration and collective action of partners and neighbors and leaders working together that truly amplifies the impact and helps build a future where all families can thrive for generations to come. Let's give them a hand. One more thing. So tonight, the Center for Heirs Property will receive the One South Carolina Partners in Progress Award at our 2026 Riley Wilkins Awards dinner. So we look forward to continuing this conversation. If you're registered to join us for that dinner, you can make your way upstairs in just a few minutes. Our cocktail reception will start at 5:30, followed by the dinner at 6:30. And if you're just here for the forum today, we greatly appreciate you coming to learn with us and wish you safe travels home. Thank you all again for being here. All right,